If you or someone you know is considering suicide, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text the crisis text line at 741-741.
The counselor met with the parent's child, but adds that conversations I have with my students are private. Hey, that's not an accurate statement, okay? That's not an accurate statement. Conversations involving child abuse or county protective services are private. Yes, absolutely. Conversations involving peer conflicts would not be private, and that's what this appeared to be.
When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Welcome to Awareness, Season 1, Episode 17 of the show that takes you beyond the headlines. If you are here for the first time, this is part 2 of a 2-part story. So please go back and listen to part 1, Episode 16. Otherwise, you might be lost. I want to start today's episode by saying thanks to those who posted their comments on the Facebook bullying discussion group, as well as those who have reached out to me telling me how they perceived my interaction with the school counselor. There were a few people that took the counselor's side, some that took my side, and some that teetered back and forth. I considered many different ways to share this episode with you, but ultimately, I decided I wanted to try to deliver the episode as straightforward as possible, without interjecting much emotion. I wanted to deliver just the facts of what happened. And based on the feedback so far, I believe the episode had its intended effect. I really do appreciate all the feedback. This last episode was very emotional for me. I seriously considered whether or not to release it to you. But after a few months of debating, I decided to ask Dr. Perrodin if he would take the raw audio and analyze it. I knew his over 20 years experience in this arena would help me frame how that discussion went. And after he said yes, I knew I had to share this insight. That was the moment I decided to share this with you. When I sent the audio to Dr. Perrodin, he didn't have any knowledge of the events leading up to the conversation. He just had the audio of the conversation, so his analysis is solely based on the conversation. Dr. David Perrodin has 12 years experience as a director of student services. He left that profession to focus exclusively on researching school safety and high-stakes decision-making at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. As an expert in safety preparedness and response, Dr. Perrodin has presented on public television, in school districts, and at safety conferences. He is a school safety litigation expert witness with the Expert Institute. He meticulously reviewed thousands of pages of depositions and policy documents to inform legal counsel and courts on matters of student safety, and he brings that expertise to you today. On today's episode, we will learn about the aftermath, about what I was thinking and feeling, as well as an unbiased analysis of the conversation. So let's begin. approximately 3 hours after my conversation with the school counselor. I sent a follow-up email, recapping what was discussed during the conversation. The email states the following and was sent on January 23rd at 4:42 p.m. Per our discussion, this is a summary of my understanding for the next steps. Bullet point 1. My daughter will meet with you, follow up, just her tomorrow, January 24th, and you will follow up with us. Bullet point 2. You, as time permits, will try to observe my daughter at the after-school program discreetly and report back anything that you see that is concerning to you. Bullet point 3. We will not reprimand my daughter for any information you gave me today, from the notes that you documented during your time with her on January 17th and 18th. Bullet point 4. You, me, and my wife will work to resolve as a collaboration any further incidents regarding the person in question and her friendship with my daughter. Bullet point 5. The discussions we, me and my wife, have with you will be kept confidential as to maintain any trust my daughter has established with you. If for any reason we need to break this agreement, we, you, me, and my wife, will collaborate to ensure that my daughter's best interest is the focus. If I missed anything, please let me know so that we are on the same page. I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today and for caring about what happens to the students. It is greatly appreciated. I am very happy that we got past the miscommunication and focused the discussion on what is best for my daughter. On a side note, my daughter may not be the only kid affected by the person of note. Others might be as well, just afraid to speak up. Please look into it. I want to give you a little bit more background about the events leading up to my daughter reporting that she had spoken to a school counselor. Almost daily, we started having the after-school program notify us of unacceptable behavior my daughter was expressing. She was being disrespectful to staff and particularly having conflicts with a specific student. A student she called her best friend at the time. Yes, the same kid she was reporting to the counselor. My daughter was an A and high B student up until that point, and then the grades started to slip significantly. So I took over homework duties and spent over an hour nightly working with my daughter to ensure that she was understanding her homework. There have been numerous bullying stories stating that grades slipping at school was an indication that some stressor was happening at the school. So naturally, I was hyper aware and I started to pay attention a little more carefully. And then the night of the 17th happened, and then it became clear to me that there could be a potential pattern of something going on at the school that was causing my daughter to be stressed. That's why I was so aggressive in the emails with the school counselor. Now I realized that I used the word escalate, and I did that very purposefully, and I wanted to let the school counselor know that I was serious and that I wasn't just going to go away. I didn't want the counselor to brush me off. So I started using the word escalate, and well, you saw how that turned out. Not too well. It was probably not the best choice of words, but I wanted to let the school know that I was serious about discussing this issue with them. Now, after a reflection and after the analysis that you're going to hear in a few minutes, I understand that this probably primed the school counselor to be on the defensive. In fact, I know it did. So yeah, do I regret using the word escalate? Absolutely. It absolutely could have been done better. What was really concerning me and what really made me upset, and it still makes me upset to this day, is the fact that I had to push so hard to get the little information that I was asking for. All I was asking for, give me a summary of the discussion that you had with my daughter. That's it. I just wanted to know that. We asked very cordially in the email for the counselor to give us that information. And then we get the vague responses, we get the combative behavior, And well, you heard the discussion as well. It shouldn't have been that hard to get that information. So I want people listening to know that it's not going to be as easy as you think it is to get information from the schools. Now, my approach may have hampered that a bit. And we did overcome that, and the school and the counselor were willing to give me that information, but it was a struggle. You heard immediately she was throwing out the fact that she had privacy concerns and didn't want to release that information. It's understandable if she's trying to protect the students in question, but in this situation, this is my daughter and I had to push. A year and a half ago, I wouldn't have pushed. I would have just accepted the fact that she said that it was resolved. And I probably would have let it go. And I don't know how this would have played out. Nobody does. But I feel like I was able to, after that conversation, empower my daughter to make decisions, empower her to take control of the situation. Now, I want everybody to know as well that throughout this process, my daughter was aware that we were contacting the school counselor. She had asked us to do that. Now, based on all the research that I've done as well, I knew that I had to empower her to make the decisions, to help her or guide her through the decisions that she is making and the choices that she is making in respect to taking control of what is happening at the school as much as possible. So I knew this. She knew what was going on. You know, throughout the beginning of that, probably the first 10 minutes of that conversation, I had to keep asking myself if I was overreacting to the situation. And I think nowadays most parents are underreacting to those situations, and that's causing problems in the school. And it's causing problems with the kids. So I constantly have to be asking myself to calibrate my perspective on what is happening at the school and what is happening with my daughter's interaction with that school. And I was trying to gain information. It should not have been this difficult. The other thing is also I had to connect the dots for the school counselor. What really pisses me off is the fact that the counselor didn't realize that this was a serious situation. Now, the reason I'm saying it's a serious situation is because the counselor did mention that the reason she got involved was because my daughter had reported to another teacher that this was happening and nothing happened. So now my daughter continued to reach out to the next level and the next level. So that alone there should have told her that there was something going on that was a little more serious than she had anticipated. Now, I had to connect the dots for her. And I don't know if most parents would have been able to do that. I've been looking into this for a long time, so I can see the patterns, but my fear is that not many parents would know to connect the dots for the school. They would put their trust in the school, which is not an unreasonable request, but nowadays it's becoming more and more dangerous to do so without us being aware of what's happening, which is why I'm doing this. The other thing that really pissed me off, and please excuse my language, is the fact that she blew right past my report of another kid being physically harmed. She blew right past that. She minimized it, in fact. She even said, well, it's not happening to your daughter. Well, what the... I don't understand. I don't understand why she did that. I don't understand why she didn't follow up. Up next, you're going to hear the analysis that Dr. Perrodin provided on the conversation that I had with the school counselor. Stay tuned.
Hi, This is Hector Solis.
Hi, Mr. Solis.
Hi, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great, thank you.
I just wanted to call because I had a question, and week came to us saying that she had a conversation with the counselor, which was you. And she said she wasn't in trouble or anything, but that she was trying to give us information as to why she was there, but she couldn't quite articulate what she was there for. Now, when I asked Miss, she said that had come to her requesting that she see you. So that's the information that I got from Miss. And so I'm just wanting to make sure that I understand why they wanted to see you and what the extent of those discussions were.
Okay, she wanted. Okay, you know what a counselor is?
Yes.
The parent calmly and clearly articulates the purpose of the call, which is to help him understand why his child was asked to meet with the school counselor. The school counselor asked the parent, "Do you know what a counselor is?" Hey, that question reveals that the school counselor is feeling challenged by the parent, regardless of if the parent says, "Yes, I know what a school counselor is," or "No, I don't know what a school counselor is." The school counselor is going to explain the role of the school counselor. So you don't ask that question. You don't ask, "Do you know what a school counselor is?" You explain, "Here's what I do at the school. Here's the way that I interact with students. Here's my job description." And the other part is a counselor's role is going to be different in an elementary school versus middle school versus high school. So all of those things need to be described, but do not ask, "Do you know what a counselor is?" The parent responds that he knows what a counselor does, but doesn't provide specific details. So this is where the parent could say, "I know what a counselor does. You are running groups on healthy decision-making. What is bullying? Positive behavioral interventions and supports. Groups for students that might have had some trauma in their life, homelessness, divorce, something to that effect." So at least you're putting it out there, giving the opportunity then for the counselor to say, "Yeah, I do those things and these things." So when the parent responds that he knows what a counselor does, well, let's think about this. The parent was in school, 20, 25, 30 years ago. So understanding firsthand what a counselor does, we kind of benchmark that back to when we were in school. So I think always as a parent, you respond to this and say, "Help me to understand what your day looks like or your week and how my child fits into that, and how working with children that are, experiencing whatever it could be, bullying, harassment, these other things. How does that all happen? And then who else is involved in that? Who else? Do you work with the school psychologist? Is there another counselor, the principal? Is there a team?" So that then creates inter-rater reliability. Very important. So, okay, so the counselor does not know, again, the parent's interpretation of the role of the counselor. And at this point, we're about just a minute into the phone call, and we don't have this inter-rater reliability between the two parties, between the parent and the counselor. So always take that opportunity to describe. "Help me to understand" is a good phrase to do that. Very non-threatening, but what exactly is it that you do? And the ways that you help children, and then you can bring it in specific to your child. So when you say, "Yes, I understand," in this case, it ended. And there could be a huge difference in what the parent believes as the duties of the school counselor and what actually are the duties of a school counselor. And again, it varies from school to school.
Okay, because if children are referred to me, we discussed she had a conflict with another student in the after-school program.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to help them resolve that conflict. And she came back the next day because we were going to meet with the other student as well so they could express their feelings about what happened. But conversations I have with any of my students are private and confidential.
So
If they come to me about a concern, like if they come to me about being abused at home, I'm not going to call their parents and let them know that they're being abused.
that's correct.
That
So
they
are we
reported
talking
that.
about?
Yeah.
Are we talking? But you're saying specifically that it was an incident with another student. So in that situation, I need to be made aware of the confidentiality goes out the window because my daughter is now at risk. Because if this happens to escalate past whatever you think you resolved, I'm not aware of it.
The counselor explains why the counselor met with the parent's child, but adds that conversations I have with my students are private. Hey, that's not an accurate statement, okay? That's not an accurate statement. Conversations involving child abuse or county protective services are private. Yes, absolutely. Conversations involving pure conflicts would not be private, and that's what this appeared to be. So it's also important to point out that the parent did not ask for documentation, but was asking for an explanation. So obviously when a parent asks, I need to see the documentation, the names of other students and things like this, well, those are privileged documents, and for privacy rights, you are not going to be provided that information of other students that were involved in a meeting with the counselor or an investigation or something like that. Typically, you're not going to be provided that. In some cases, you would be provided if it would have a direct influence maybe on your child. Somebody was making a threat toward your child, you would be informed of that because that you'd want to know outside of the school environment also. So the parent explained or said, I'm asking for an explanation. I want to know why. Okay. So, which is a great question to ask. I'm asking, I want to know why. Help me to understand. Okay. Remember that phrase, help me to understand.
Do you see where I'm coming from? I don't want to be made aware.
Right, but it wasn't a discipline issue. It was just a conflict between two students. It wasn't a discipline issue. My assistant principal was a discipline and context parent. Students who requested to see me, it's something that they want to talk about privately. And I do encourage them to go home and talk to their students we do go home and talk to their parents because I do not. For 17 years, I do not call parents and tell them what their child came in here and told me about.
The parent states that if he had been made aware of that, this is what he's saying. If I had been made aware of that, I could have monitored that matter at home. Okay, if I was aware that there was this conflict going on with another student, I could have monitored this at home. So this makes sense, especially in the age of social media. So if there is something going on in the school setting, it's likely probably going on outside of the school setting too. So if these children are together outside of school for any reason, the parent is then able to monitor and be a buffer. For example, they could be on the same youth soccer team. So that makes sense for the parent to say, if there's something going on with another student, a conflict, and it's adversely affecting my child, I want to know about it because I want to watch for that at home or in community settings where these two might interact. So the meeting is off to a rough start. We're just over 2 minutes in. The meeting's off to a rough start. The counselor states that this was not a discipline issue, and discipline issues are handled by the assistant principal. The counselor also states that if students want to meet with the counselor, those are private meetings. Okay, so the counselor's talking faster and has assumed a defensive posture. It is no longer about what happened, but this discussion is now about the discretion and privileges afforded to the counselor. So what we're starting to see is the counselor is becoming defensive and saying, hey, this was not a discipline issue. Therefore, We wouldn't go through like a full investigation. And those types of things are handled by the assistant principal. If students want to meet with me, yeah, those are private meetings. I'm not contacting parents, if a student comes in and has concerns with me. So these are things that are very kind of defensive. It's like, okay, do you know what a counselor does? But then the counselor is going to start to impose some of these things at this point in the conversation. The counselor states that students are encouraged to go home and talk to their parents because I do not. I believe that the counselor should have called the parent. The youth code of silence is very difficult for researchers to understand, and it was at play here, okay? Youth will often not share concerns with their parents. So for the counselor to say that the counselor encourages students to go home and talk to their parents, well, we know that typically doesn't happen. There's also the fear of retaliation. If the student tells a parent, will the parent be upset with the student? Will his parents say, hey, I don't want you to cause trouble with other kids? Or will a parent seek out the parent of the other child? And pretty soon you have a parent versus parent issue. I think counselors are very aware of this. The counselor probably witnessed this on other occasions and was measuring words in describing the interaction with the child, because obviously not wanting this to become something where one parent tries to figure out who is this other child and who are these other parents. So the counselor had been in that position for 17 years and it said, I do not call parents and tell them what their child came in here and talked about. Okay, I get that. But that isn't helping resolve this parent's question. And it also alludes to much discretion afforded to the counselor. I would say too much discretion. So when you have site-based management in schools, site-based management meaning that the principals have control of their school buildings, and often then the principals will say the teachers have control of their classrooms and the counselors have control of whatever. It becomes where there isn't a lot of accountability. It doesn't mean necessarily that people aren't doing their job. It means, though, that you do not have a lot of documentation and you definitely don't have a lot of record keeping, which is evident as we get into this call that we didn't have records. And when you don't have records, you can't see patterns. You can't see longitudinal things develop. I'm not sure the principal would have the same interpretation of what this counselor said as far as that the counselor in 17 years shouldn't be calling parents, that's not the role. But again, think about this. The counselor's been in this role 17 years. I don't know if the counselor's been at the school 17 years, but let's say that the counselor has been in that school. Principals typically turn over every 2 to 3 years. So that counselor might have had 4 to 5 principals, different leadership models. And if you do have site-based management, then staff can have a lot of discretion over what they do. When you have a lot of discretion, you typically have less documentation and less record keeping. That tended to be evident through this call.
Okay, so let me explain to you where I'm coming from, because I think maybe you're not aware of the full situation. Throughout this year, we have been dealing with, and there's been an issue with a particular student in class or out of class as well. And so my concerns as a parent is that we're having a situation where either my daughter is going to be bullied or she's experiencing or witnessing bullying that's happening with this student. So
friends. Hold on. Friends.
I know they're friends.
Okay.
She's told me that too.
Okay.
So just listen, please, right? You're a counselor. You need to listen, please.
The parent calmly asked the counselor to allow him to explain the full scope of the matter, noting that the counselor might not be fully informed of everything that's contributing to this issue. The counselor responds positively to this, and this is a good reset point for the call. So things kind of get back on track here. Things are, we're off to kind of a rough start, and now we've got to a point where, okay, the parent wants to make sure, well, there's a lot of things at play here. Things are going on in school and at home and whatever, and I want to make you aware of that. The counselor interrupts the parent to state that the parent's child and the other student are friends. So when the parent is saying, I have a concern about my child and this other student, the counselor interrupts and says, well, but they're friends. Most of the time they're friends and they present as friends. So I want to get that out, that you have a concern over friends. The parent now, with frustration in his tone, asks the counselor to please listen. Please listen to me, okay? Listen.
So when I expressed to her that I did not want her interacting with that student anymore, she said, and these were her words exactly, if I stop talking to her, then I become the target. Those were her words exactly. So now you tell me, as a parent, are you a parent, by the way?
No, sir.
The parent asked the counselor, are you a parent, by the way? The counselor softly responds, no, sir. This question was out of bounds for the parent to ask, okay? It doesn't matter if there is no special credential or credibility that is given if you are a parent. I knew a principal who often prefaced her statements with, I'm not a parent, but if I was. And eventually she was coached by her superintendent to say, no, you don't need to say that. You don't need to say that. That doesn't make you a less effective counselor because you are not a parent. So that question was a little bit pushing by the parent. It should have been recognized as yet a further deterioration of this phone call and an opportunity for the counselor or parent to bring the call to a close and just follow up with a follow-up call or an in-person meeting.
Okay, so as a parent, you become extremely concerned with something like that happening, especially with all the stuff that's going on with David's Law being passed and all the issues that are going on right now with bullying and cyberbullying and things of that nature. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to protect my daughter. And if that involves me getting involved with the school and the school supporting me in that, then that's what I'm looking for. I don't care about privacy, because if something happens and we're going to come back and we say, oh, well, privacy was more important than my daughter's safety. Unacceptable. So if you're saying to me...
That's incorrect. The privacy is not more important than your child's safety. I would not say that.
Right, exactly. But if something were to happen and then you bring me in later, let's say this continues to happen, and then you come back and say, well, we were trying to resolve a conflict and it didn't work out. Because those were your words. It was a conflict, right, with another student?
Yes.
The parent is extensively talking about bullying laws, and the role of the parent in keeping his child safe from being the recipient of bullying. What the parent is actually asking is to be informed about the school's bully education, referral, identification, and resolution processes. So all schools have these, but the inner workings are often only known by school staff. The parent could have reviewed his child's student handbook prior to the phone call and referenced segments of it pertaining to bullying or harassment or non-discrimination. This would have helped foster inter-rater reliability between the parent and the counselor. The counselor would have the same handbook. The parent is pushing the counselor further out of the counselor's comfort zone at this point in the conversation. The parent states that privacy is not more important than his child's safety. The counselor then informs the parent that his interpretation is not correct. So we have more friction in this phone call. So we're 4 minutes in, and now it is a heated discussion. Yet, the objective should be the same for the parent and for the counselor, and that is to be proactive in limiting opportunities for the parent's child to be the recipient of bullying behavior.
Okay. So if there's a conflict, by definition, a conflict means that something is happening. There's a disagreement or something that has escalated to the point where a supervisor or
I
an
never use the
adult.
word escalate.
Well,
I would not use the word escalate.
Well, you wouldn't, but I'm saying that if there was a conflict that was going to be resolved between two kids and it was something that didn't need an adult's intervention.
If I felt like it was something that needed parents' attention, I would definitely let them know. In this situation, I did not feel like that was necessary at all.
Who is your
I was
supervisor?
going to the extreme.
Who is your supervisor? Who is your supervisor at the school? Okay, so look, obviously you don't want to listen to what I have to say because you keep interrupting.
The parent defines his interpretation of the term conflict, which is accurate to varying degrees based upon context and situation. He is creating a universal definition when that really can't be done in schools. What is conflict? You have to do an investigation to figure out what is conflict versus what is bullying, for example. So this is something where, again, the parent is taking a lot of control of this conversation, putting the counselor in a further defensive position, as the counselor didn't begin the discussion with talking about the role of the counselor in some germane key terms, such as conflict. We are now at a point where the parent is kind of saying what should be said by the counselor. This would likely further destabilize the discussion, as it is presumed the counselor isn't aware of fundamental terms and practices of the school counseling profession, meaning the counselor isn't talking about conflict. Here's what we do for conflict in the school, how we define conflict, how we assess for conflict, make kids aware of like pure conflict. If there are two kids who are wanting to pitch the ball in kickball and they argue about that, that's a pure conflict. Here's what we do for bullying and system-wide anti-bullying efforts and reporting and all of those things. This was the prime opportunity for the counselor to jump in on that. But the counselor stayed back. The counselor tells the parent that if the counselor felt the situation warranted the parents to be made aware, then the counselor would do that. But in this situation, the counselor didn't believe that the parent needed to be made aware of the situation. Okay, the counselor has conflicted an earlier statement where the counselor said, after 17 years of working with students, I never contact the parents. Well, here the counselor is saying there are times when I do contact the parents. The call, again, is at a friction point, and there's an opportunity to cordially terminate it, as we had talked about. I think the perfect term or the phrase for the counselor could be, I want to be as helpful to you as possible. Let's be clear about your questions. I'll review my notes and call you back. 5 minutes, 14 seconds. The parent is frustrated and asks, who is your supervisor? Obviously, you don't want to listen to what I have to say. As this was the first call from the parent about this incident, call into the counselor, the parent is putting a lot of pressure on the counselor to provide specific information. The questions are appropriate, but it just might not be a good time for this call to happen. Again, we don't know in the counselor's world what just occurred 1 minute before that phone call came in. Okay. Obviously, the counselor does not have the materials at their disposal to articulate this conversation with the child and some of the more global concerns or programs that are going on in the school. The counselor just doesn't seem very prepared for this call. The counselor is not listening to the parent. The counselor is still at the 5 minute mark defending practices and discretion. This is why I'm afforded this much discretion. Because I'm afforded this much discretion, I don't have to, contact parents. I don't have to, do certain documentation and certain things in emails and whatever. I mean, that is very much there, but that could be systemic of the entire school. Okay. So, the counselor is not undermining the parent, but it was the parent who made that statement of, are you a parent? When the parent asked that of the counselor and the counselor said no, that definitely was an undermining factor. I mean, it dented the credibility of the counselor during the call and made it seem like, well, if you're not a parent, you're not going to understand this to the depth that I'm going to understand it. The parent said the counselor probably hears things like that often, but it has nothing to do with the issue at hand, which is working in the best interests of this student.
It's happened one time. You're questioning my job and what I do every day.
All I'm asking is for information.
You're questioning my judgment then.
Okay, so you want me to know, let me give you what I'm questioning. We sent you an email about a week ago. My wife sent you an email. No response, right? 3 days, no response. Okay.
I called your wife.
Oh, when did you call her?
Last week when I got with the email.
No. So let me explain. You called after I got involved. So I put in there that I would like some information. No response. So at that point, you responded saying resolved. I have all the documentation. I have the emails. I have the timelines. Okay. So you wait 3 days to do anything. I respond. You don't do anything.
3 days? What 3 days? Saturday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
That was
what 3 days are you talking about?
As soon as we heard.
We were gone 4 days last week.
The first day that you spoke to that afternoon, that evening, my daughter sent the email. You were supposed to meet with her 2 days. So you met with her that day and the day after. The email went out that night. Okay? There was no response from you. Is that correct?
The parent mentions that his wife sent the counselor an email about a week ago. 3 days, no response. The counselor states that a call was made to the parent's wife. The parent notes that the call was only placed after he became involved. And he states that he has emails and he has timelines. Okay, that's best practice, actually, for the parent to document through email. Okay. And any phone calls that you write down when phone calls happen. So that is very good to put together a timeline of discussion, who you talked with, what they said, and then also to do like a follow-up. So this counselor prefers to talk by phone, and there are benefits to that because you can ask clarifying questions that you couldn't ask in an email. Now, there's downsides to talking on the phone because you're not creating a document. Typically, you're not creating a record. So what happens then is if you do have a phone conversation with somebody at the school, it's best to assemble a concise email saying, thank you for our phone call today. And we addressed these points, 1, 2, 3, 4, and these are going to be the responses or the action steps for 1, 2, 3, 4. And then here's like what's on the horizon. Like we're going to have a follow-up phone call on 8 days from now, so that you have some documentation to go along with that phone call, because unless the phone call is recorded, which typically you're probably not going to do. But again, it's not a bad thing. You have to check your laws in your state on whether to record a call or not. I actually encouraged parents to either record phone calls or allow me as a school administrator to record the phone call. And I would say, I'm just doing this so I can be in the moment with you in this conversation, and that I'm not going to be tied up taking notes. Okay. And I'm like, I will give you a copy of exactly what we record. I will give you that copy. And most of the time, parents respect that. So that's something also to consider is having a discussion and saying, we're going to talk. I don't think you need to do it for every discussion, but in something like this, we're going to talk about some key things, and I want to make sure that I'm engaged in a conversation with you. So I'm going to record this, or let the school staff know ahead of time. I'm going to record this call, and then it gives them the opportunity to record it, or you can say, I'll give you the same. And the software is pretty ubiquitous to do things like that today. I think it's good because you can always go back, and it's accountability, and it gives you things that you overlook, often during meetings. So, and if you have a face-to-face meeting, get out a whiteboard and write up, here are our talking points or our concerns, and then here's our action steps, and here's the next time we'll meet. Take a picture of it. There's great software out there that you can download, or just your phone, take a picture of it. And then in that moment, take the email address of the people around the table, the teacher, the counselor, the principal, or whatever, and boom, send it to them, and they've got it, you've got it, and you have that shared document of what was discussed. Because again, as time passes, it's going to be more difficult to say, we talked about this or we didn't talk about this. So that's kind of the pros and cons of the phone conversations.
Not even hey, this is not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Everything's okay. I've got it handled. It's not an issue that I think can be escalated. That's all we wanted. But you didn't. You didn't respond. So as your responsibility as a
now
school
you're going to
counselor,
threaten me?
I'm not threatening you. I'm trying to get information.
Well, I feel threatened, sir. I feel like you're very hostile with me.
I'm not. I'm trying to get information.
That's how I feel. I'm sorry.
Well, that's all. I mean, that's not my problem.
After the parent states he and his wife were frustrated by no response from the counselor states, "So now you are going to threaten me?" Okay, once a call escalates to this level, it's best to bring it to a close. This is now very personal. This is the perception of the counselor. So the counselor is not in a good place. This call does end very well, but in general, my recommendation would be that if someone is feeling, threatened during a discussion, they're really saying, I don't have the information available, to me. And again, there was this didn't start well because we didn't have the inter-rater reliability, where the counselor would describe their role. Here's what I do, and give examples of things, and get some inter-rater reliability on terms. What is bullying? What is conflict, and things like that. So all of those things kind of never happened at the start. So there were a lot of assumptions, and they weren't aligned between what the parent had and what the counselor had, and then those things kind of had to be hashed out as we got into the conversation. There's a lot of friction points with that. So again, I think it's, in most cases, it would be good to shut down a conversation like this. The counselor says, "I feel threatened, sir. I feel that you're being hostile with me." The parent responds that he is wanting information, and he is not threatening the counselor. Okay, I wonder how this call would have gone, again, had the parent sent the counselor an email a day before with the top 3-4 points he wanted to talk about during a phone call, maybe any documents he wanted to reference, such as the school handbook, and then leave a message, leave it at night when the counselor's not there, so the counselor gets it the next day, and just saying, hey, to help make our meeting as efficient as possible tomorrow, because obviously, we both have busy schedules, I emailed you some questions that I want to talk about, and also if you can have the handbook ready in page 27, where it talks about, bullying and bullying reporting and harassment and things like that, and discipline. If we can go over some points in there, that would be helpful. So, hey, that gives the counselor time to prepare. It also clearly gives the counselor an understanding of what to expect for the questions, so the counselor can make sure that any documentation records or anybody else that the counselor needs to go to, pulling anything off of the school data system. So those types of things can happen. It gives the counselor a little bit of time to look holistically at student grades and other student attendance and just other factors that might play in, talk with the student's teacher, so forth. The parent tells the counselor his concern is not what the counselor does as a job, but that his concern is his daughter. This statement diminishes the role of the counselor or anyone. So this goes back to the need right at the start of the call for the counselor to describe how the school counselor functions at the school and how the counselor and parent will work together in the best interest of the child. The counselor is in a defensive position. The parent is pressing. This call should come to a close, and then a reboot. Again, maybe in person, maybe with a supervisor present, okay? Or at least somebody to take some notes or something like that, I think those are all good approaches. Now, we've talked about something here, bullying. The parent is saying, I believe there's bullying present, that my child is being exposed to bullying, either observing it or in this relationship with a friend where if the relationship terminates, the friend then will start to bully my child. And bullying is very serious. And so the parent is perceiving this most recent incident and as part of a pattern of incidents. So there's potential bullying going on, and the school counselor perceives this as a peer conflict. So we have two things that are going on now. The counselor is saying, you know what, I see your child and this other student together. Typically, they seem like they're friends. They have their disagreements, but they seem like they're getting along. It seems like a peer conflict to me. The parent is bringing more information into this and saying, there's bullying aspects. There's bullying aspects to this. Now, when that happens, schools need to investigate bullying. In their handbooks and their policies, they will have formal procedures for doing that. Should have happened here. Bullying was mentioned enough, was insinuated enough that there should have been an investigation for bullying. However, that would have been determined by the policy and procedure of the school district. The parent expresses frustration that the counselor sent him an email about the incident, stating it was resolved without further details. This is where a school handbook would be very helpful, as most schools are required to do formal investigations of alleged harassment, bullying, or other conflict situations. And there's usually a formal letter that's created. It kind of follows a template, but that letter then is given to parents. School staff typically don't write long email responses. They're told by legal counsel, anything you put in an email can be used in the courtroom. And it's kind of informal. It's better to use a tried and true template that the school has adopted through like the handbook or through a school policy or something like that. So the parent has a genuine concern here when the parent receives an email back from the teacher and it says that the issue was, quotes, resolved. That's not sufficient. What does resolved mean? And that was a question that the parent brought up. What does resolved mean? And again, that's where explaining terminology, using the phrase, help me to understand what resolved means. Does it mean that they're in different classes now? Does it mean that you're going to be working with my child on check-ins every week? I mean, what does this really mean? What has happened? And so this is really what the parent is trying to figure out.
I don't care about, what you're coming in and what you're doing and what you do is your job. That's not my concern. My concern is my daughter and getting information about my daughter. If it could be Mrs. Smith, it could be Mrs. whoever, I don't care. The person on the other line, it doesn't matter, as long as I need to get the information about my daughter and her safety at school. That's all I care about. And if all I need is a simple conversation, if you would have just responded, you could have answered this and we could have not gotten to this point. If you would have just responded and say, hey, this is what's going on. There's a conflict, just like you just told me right now. There's a conflict between two students. Your daughter reached out to me and we're taking care of it. If anything changes, I will let you know as soon as possible. But then I get a response email that just says resolved. Well, what does that mean, resolved? So I have to escalate my verbiage in the email saying, look, just give me the information. Please respond. If you're not going to respond, then I'm going to escalate. And then you call my wife this morning saying that you feel threatened, and then you start making all these calls.
I tried to call you first.
I know, but we're working. I
understand that this is when I'm working too, sir.
Exactly, but this is your job to deal with these things.
This is your job. I'm calling to talk to you about your daughter.
Exactly. But answer the questions.
The parent tells the counselor what the counselor's job is. Whoa. Imagine being told what your job is. Well, the counselor needed to do this early on, needed to say, here's what I do at the school, and then expand and build upon that out. The counselor didn't do that, though. So the parent was telling the counselor, this is your job to do X, Y, and Z. The counselor responds by telling the parent, well, this is your job. So we have this back and forth going 8 minutes in. The counselor stated that an attempt was made to call the parent prior to calling the parent's spouse. The parent replies, I was working. I have a busy schedule. True. Counselor comes back and says, this is my job. It's very busy here too. So again, there's a commonality, and there's still this friction at 8 minutes into this call. So I'm feeling that although the counselor has not met the parent's expectations, the counselor's made attempts to contact the parent. So there's credibility with this counselor. So the parent saying something like, thank you for talking with my daughter and for attempting to call me, would have helped bring this conversation back on the rails. Okay. So I think that's something the parent could have done. And just saying, again, thank you for talking with my daughter and for attempting to call me. And here, though, remain some things that we need to work through in this conversation.
So look,
let me discuss it with you.
So I'm gonna go to your boss and I'm gonna ask her if the information that you have, if I need to get access to that information. Okay. So I'm gonna ask her about that. And if she doesn't give me what I need, then I'm gonna continue to escalate this up higher, because I have read.
You're looking for. We had a situation. The situation's been resolved. Your daughter is fine. What does this have to go any further? You're just looking for something?
No, I've already told you.
I don't get it. I'm here taking care of my job and my students.
You don't get it.
Now I have to be.
I just explained to you.
No, sir, you don't.
I just explained to you.
You don't get it.
Okay, I just explained to you that I've had issues all this year with a particular student, and if is telling me that the person that
that's new information for me.
Okay,
that's new information for me.
Okay, and that's why I'm asking you.
I have not been contacted. You and your wife have not contacted me to let me know about the situation.
Because it hasn't gone to you.
From a teacher.
It hasn't gone to you. Now that you have it, and now that you have the information, does this change? Now that you have this information, does it change what you've done?
The parent informs the counselor that he will go to the counselor supervisor and ask about the process for obtaining access to the counselor's documentation or records. Okay. Obviously, putting the counselor in a defensive position, this is completely appropriate for the parent to do, but if the parent is going to say that at this point, they're saying it to try to manipulate the counselor into responding. If you say that, you really just need to end the conversation and say, this isn't going well. We're not having effective communication, so I'm going to talk to your supervisor. And the counselor did provide the name of the supervisor. So as a parent, though, try not to do the one-up in a conversation with someone unless you genuinely are at a point where that will be the end and say, we've gone as far as we can go. So now I need to talk to this person. Because otherwise it does come off as more or less trying to manipulate or pressure someone into giving you, information, acquiescing. So after the parent states that he will escalate this higher if he doesn't receive the answers he is seeking, the counselor asks, "What are you looking for?" And again conveys that the counselor believes the matter has been handled per the school protocol, which might be informal or formal. Remember, these are students that appear to be friends most of the time. It's imperative for clear, effective communication that both parties understand the concerns. You check for understanding. So the counselor is saying to the parent, so these are your concerns, explain them. And then the parent says, no, not those. You're misinterpreting. Or yes, like we're on the same page. And then also, this was a point early on. The counselor could ask, what is the outcome that you want? What is the outcome from this meeting? Okay. Because the question early on, when the parent said, I want to know about this discussion you had with my daughter. Okay. That's not so much an outcome based upon the parent really is searching for the outcome of this, of helping his daughter to find a way to either negotiate or exit her relationship with this other peer, this other classmate, this relationship which is not healthy. So that's really what the parent wants out of this. The school might not always be able to meet the outcome. So if the parent says, I want my child to be in different classes than these 5 students, and I want my child to meet with the counselor and the school psychologist every day or something like that, that might not be possible. And so you have to also ask, what do you want? What do you see as resolving this? And then bring it your experience as a counselor. And that's something the counselor didn't do much in this, was saying, with 17 years of experience, saying in some other cases similar to this, not the same, nothing is the same, but in other situations similar to this, here's some things that we did that brought positive results. So I'd like to think about these, talk about these with some of the school staff, and then talk to you and look at implementing this. And the whole time trying to build where it's a partnership between home and school. I think that would have really helped the counselor to bring that to the table. 17 years of experience, and really wasn't going to the well and saying, here are some similar experiences that I've encountered, and here's how we work through them. Not that they will necessarily be effective, but let's consider these. The parent has frequently used the word escalate to this point in the conversation. So when you use the word escalate, that has connotations as being aggressive, and few things escalate to a good outcome. Perhaps replace escalate with involve supervisors that can help us to resolve this matter. That has more of a mediator feel to it, doesn't it? So if you're saying, maybe we need to involve some supervisors or a supervisor in this matter, someone that can more objectively look at this or look at it with fresh eyes. I just think when you use the word escalate, especially in today's school culture, it puts people really on edge. I would say do not use that term. Don't use the term escalate. Because, really if you're not getting the outcome that you want from this, what you're really going to do by escalating is just describe what you're going to do. I mean, that you are going to involve supervisors and, talking with possibly administration and potentially, the school board or something like that. So, those are things that are very tangible, objective, and whatever. But escalate can be very fearful. It can bring fear. You already have a counselor who is perceiving that this is a threatening exchange, this conversation. So when you use the word escalate, it contributes to that. So again, perhaps the relationship between the parent and counselor is just damaged, and it's damaged beyond repair. If that's the case, that's where a supervisor might be able to step in and say, listen, I'm going to be the contact person with you from this point out. Schools typically don't like to do that. It's, they want you to work things out with like the classroom teacher or the counselor or whatever. But there are certain instances when it just isn't going to work out and you need to switch people. So that might have been something also that could have been pursued in this discourse. The parent says that the counselor doesn't get it. The counselor responds that the parent doesn't get it. Whoa, okay. So again, we have two people who are challenging each other of saying, you don't understand the situation and you don't understand the situation. And in some regard, that actually proves to be accurate because the parent is seeing this as potential bullying and is seeing a lot of factors also that are happening out of school and carrying over into the home setting. The counselor is seeing, for the most part, two students who are in a friendship. So, there are two different perceptions here. And again, that doesn't come out till later in the conversation. The parent tells of concerns that have gone on through the school year, and the counselor responds, this is new information for me. That's actually really good that the counselor says that, of saying, this is new. I wasn't aware of this. This is going to help me inform what I say, what we do, because, we're going to take all of the information that we have in working to resolve this, making school a better experience for your daughter. So this is the process of getting information into the open and informing both parties. Imagine how this call might have gone had it began with a sharing of, what do we know about this matter? Parent starts, and then it's the counselor. So I think had that been allowed to happen uninterrupted, that would have been helpful. And that didn't happen. Okay, what do we know about this matter? Because the parent would have shared things the parent was observing in the home setting, community setting, things like that. And then the counselor could have shared what the counselor was seeing at school. You would have definitely seen that those were two different observations. And then you could have taken those and said, well, we're working from two different vantage points. So what are we gonna do about this?
It doesn't change what's.
So then, what does it matter if you
already,
would have? Then what would it? No, I'm asking you now. Now that you know what the situation is, will you be willing to tell me what happened in that conversation? Now that you know.
Let me see what I have, what I can share with you.
The parent asked the counselor to share what was discussed between the counselor and the parent's child. The counselor responds, let me see what I can share with you. So this is actually a turning point for the better for the phone call. The counselor is open to sharing information. And I think in the past, so we have to put this into a whole longitudinal, broader context. Counselors have to be very careful of information that they share, and just also the vetting of parents and people that call in. You could have somebody call in a school that isn't related to the child or shouldn't be getting information about the child and is passed on to a counselor and starts asking questions. So counselors have to be very protective and careful with information. So here the counselor is needing to, it probably hasn't received this request, very often, and is needing to check, with some peers or administration saying, what is it that I can share with you? The counselor needs time to review documentation and consult with peers and administration. So this would be a good point to also pause the call. Just say, okay, let me see what I can share with you. Let me go through my notes, and then take that point. Let's summarize what we've talked about so far. Let's make sure we both know what the concerns are that we're going to address in the follow-up phone call. It's going to happen like in 2 hours. Or like if we schedule an in-person meeting, that would really work well right here. So again, when the counselor responds, let me see what I can share with you. That's really asking the parent for time, because what is it? The counselor is on the phone. The counselor is not going to say, just wait 5 minutes. I need to go in and talk to my principal or something like that. So as a parent, obviously you want a resolution. You want this conversation to come to a fruitful end, which it did. But you also need to respect when the counselor says, let me see what I can share with you. The counselor's genuinely at this point wanting to double check that they are in compliance with FERPA and HIPAA and exchange of information type laws, because those are very, very critical for the counselor. So there's due diligence that's being done by the counselor, not really being recognized by the parent at this point. The counselor begins to share some specific details of the counselor's documentation. So the counselor doesn't state names of other students, which is good, but does state specific quotes of things that were said during this discussion that the counselor had with the parent's child. So there is documentation. That's great. So it might have taken the counselor 10 minutes to locate that documentation. Maybe it was in an electronic format. Maybe it wasn't, in a file. Take some time to review it, but it obviously wasn't there at the beginning of the phone call. So I imagine this counselor is engaged in this call and then also trying to type and find, where these things were located or going through stuff. So again, this would have been good to articulate these main points and main concerns, maybe give an hour, 3 hours, whatever it be, and then do a follow-up phone call. I think the counselor would have been much more prepared with the documentation.
I'm not asking about names of other students or anything like that. I just want to know what his concerns were. That's it. I just want to know. I can't parent her if I don't know what's going on. You guys are with her 8 hours of the day, right? So I'm putting my trust into the school district in your hands, and I trust that. But I get suspicious when I don't get communications when I'm asking about it. And then all of a sudden, I threaten to escalate, and all of a sudden, I start getting barraged with information. And it shouldn't have to be that way.
Okay, well, one thing I have here is that a student told her, shut your mouth.
Okay.
And then I have, it was reported to the kids, but nothing had changed.
Okay. That's consistent with what I know.
Considers this other student to be her friend.
Yes.
And then maybe was getting in trouble at home because of just the stuff that was going on here and being reported to home.
Okay.
So was starting to get in trouble. There was consequences from her behavior here, but maybe it was not all on her, which, she just happened to maybe be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Okay.
Involved in the wrong situation.
Okay. That's good, because that's exactly what's happening. Is she's in the proximity of this person, and I'm not going to name her. I know who she is, but I'm not going to name her because I don't want to put you in that situation, because I understand the need for the privacy there and the protection and the FERPA laws. I understand all that stuff. So, and this is where my concern is that she's in an environment where she's around this person, and that person is instigating things and causing things, and of course is going along with it as well. But she made a specific comment to me stating that she feels that if she doesn't go along or she disconnects from that person, that she will become then the target.
After listening to the counselor calmly present specific statements from the documentation, the parent responds, "That's good," as the information is largely congruent with what the parent is aware of or has observed. So the parent has seen and is hearing from his child largely what is being expressed by the counselor. So both are on the same page. That's really good. The calls now become productive. Both parties are talking at a normal pace with a normal volume. The parent has respected the counselor's need to not mention names of other students. That is the right of the counselor to not share that information under most circumstances. The parent states his primary concern, which is that his child believes they will become the target of the author of the harassment, bullying, unless the child maintains a friendship with that author. So the parent's child has a friend. The friend is exhibiting bullying behaviors toward other people. The parent's child is afraid that if the parent's child ends that friendship with this other student, then that student will start turning on the parent's child and bully the parent's child. So this is really what the parent is concerned about. The parent has seen this other child, has heard of instances of bullying behavior by this other child, and is realizing that his own child is saying, listen, if I end my friendship with this person, they're going to turn on me and they're going to retaliate against me and I'm going to be bullied and it's not going to be good. So this is really the meat of what's going on here. This is a parent who is saying, my child is basically maintaining this unhealthy relationship with someone that's making negative choices and exhibiting bullying toward other students, and they're doing this, and they're going along with some other negative things that this child is doing because they don't want that other student to turn on them. So that's what this is about. This is about retaliation and feeling trapped. Like what's the way out? That's a lot different than where we started, right? So this has really progressed now.
What do you think that she meant by that?
We were specifically talking about bullying. I asked her, does this person bully other students? And she said, yes. And I asked her, do you understand what bullying means? And she said, well, when you're mean to another person. I said, not necessarily. I said, this is a targeted behavior that's repeated over time. It can be physical or it can be non-physical. It can be behaviors that exclude other people. It can be behaviors that are real subtle by just making fun of them or talking behind their back and making sure they know about it. I explained to her what the differences were. And I said, does this person do those things? And she said, yes, sometimes. And she gave me names of the people that she targets. Then about a week or two ago, she gave me a specific incident when that person went and yanked another kid by the backpack and punched them in the stomach. So at that point, it got physical. So now that person, whatever the bullying behavior was, is now escalated to a physical nature. When all year up until this point, it was on verbal or nonverbal. So,
but she wasn't physical towards, this teacher wasn't physical towards Lena.
I know, but she's observing those behaviors. And that's why I asked her, I don't want you to communicate with this person anymore. I don't want you to hang out with this person. And that's when she said, Dad, if I stop doing that, then I become the target.
The parent shares that he believes this behavior might be bullying. He has asked his child to define bullying and indicates that his child defines it as someone being mean to another person. The parent shares that he then described the widely accepted definition to his daughter as it's targeted, it's repeated, it's over time, there can be isolation involved. Parent is very well educated to what is bullying and helps coach his daughter on here's what is bullying and how to observe for it. Now, the part that's missing in this is what does the student handbook say about bullying? How does the student handbook define bullying and harassment? Because it does. It does. What's the school policy or administrative regulations? So that should have been there. How to make a bullying report, how to make a harassment report. The counselor should be aware of how bullying is reported and investigated in the school. Likely is, if there's much discretion, if it's site-based management, a lot of that gets done very informally through talks and things like that. Records are not generated, which probably happen here. What I see as a problem is that this matter was not considered as potential bullying by the school. So if you have a conflict between students, that's not going to trigger an investigation. A bullying report, however, will. The parent shares that his child told him of a physical altercation that the child observed involving the student. And the child is feeling, hey, again, I need to maintain this friendship, or that person that was bullied, that's going to be me. Like this other person, if I don't stay their friend, they're going to turn on me. So a question. What is the threat reporting system again in a school? In this school, a lot of schools are using online threat reporting systems. You can report anonymously if you want. As a parent, you can report. There can be multiple ways between written reporting, going to an adult, but it was never mentioned by the counselor of saying, here's what the threat reporting system is, here's what the bully reporting system is, or even the counselor to say, you know what, I think we've crossed over to the point where this might be bullying and harassment. Let's have an investigation. Because the investigation determines if it is bullying and harassment, okay? You don't have to have bullying and harassment confirmed and then do an investigation. So the investigation would look into this and say, is there bullying behavior going on? And it's this other student, and then is there now this feeling by the parent's child that they will be the recipient of retaliation if they do not maintain almost this coerced friendship. One of the things I see often is that parents are not explicitly informed of how to report concerns to the school. So this might have been something in the handbook, but again, the counselor wasn't talking about it. The parent didn't say, hey, at the start of the year, we were informed about this. So that didn't come out. That's something I would say, make it very explicit as a school on what is bullying, what is harassment, how to do that as far as like report that.
So she's perceptive enough to understand that the people that go against this person become targets in some way. So now what does she do? Does she go along with it and continue to get in trouble at school? Or does she back out and become a target? So this is where I'm concerned. That's why I want to know what's going on. So the information you just gave me is exactly consistent with what is going on and what I've been hearing. And so now my daughter has now escalated this. She went and told somebody it didn't get done. She went to Miss. Now Miss went and recommended her to you, which is exactly what I should be doing.
The parent describes that his daughter has observed that other children that go against this friend of his child receive verbal or physical harassment or altercations. The parent again states that his child feels that the child must maintain the friendship with the other student, or the child will become the recipient of bullying from that student. The parent asks the counselor, does my child continue to go along with this other student and get in trouble at school? Or does my child back out and become a target? It's a great question. That's tough. You have to work as a whole school team on something like that, and empowering with the parent and the child and supporting. That's a great question. I'm sure a lot of parents have that question. Counselors probably encountered that many times over a 17-year career. This is where bullying procedures and pupil non-discrimination and harassment regulations come into play. The school would have an obligation to prevent targeting of the parent's child. The parent states to the counselor, I don't know if you see it, but there's a pattern here. The counselor might not observe the pattern. If previous incidents or discussions with other staff were not documented and recorded, then it's almost impossible to identify a pattern. From the counselor's comments near the start of the call, my impression is that staff are afforded much discretion, maybe too much discretion. The counselor had documentation, but did that documentation become a record? Was it entered into the school database, for example? Schools have data management software. There is a section to report discipline or student concerns. How is this completed at this school? In my observations, this varies greatly from school to school, with some schools having no entries at all, to others having extensive narratives.
So I don't know if you see it or not, but there's a pattern here. My daughter tried to handle it for the past 6 months, 8 months, whatever you've guys been in school. And now she's reaching out to adults for help. Whether it's subtle or not, she's asking for help for things to stop. If she didn't get that support from, I've been trying to support her by telling her, to stay away from these people. But she's telling me that she's backed into a corner, basically. And so now what's her next step? She escalated to Miss and she asked Miss to talk to you. Do you see what I'm seeing or no?
Yes.
Okay. So what I don't want is the next step to happen, where I forbid to hang around with this person. Now she becomes a target, and then you and I and the school and the principal, now we're all getting involved because we have a situation where now my daughter is being targeted. And by that time, it's already too late, because what's going to happen is that kid is going to start to socially isolate my daughter, because I've met that little kid, and she is a very smart kid, and she's very manipulative with the kids that are around her, and she knows how to do it very well.
The parent states that if the child ends the relationship with the other student, then targeting will occur, and that the situation will then involve additional school staff, including the principal. Okay, this is a change in how the parent uses the term escalation. Escalation gets removed and situation is inserted in its place. Okay, a much more appropriate term. So the parent is not describing escalation as a tool that he might use until this matter is resolved, but he's describing what he perceives will happen on its own if the matter is not addressed. Just between the students, what's going to happen between them, others infected in the school by the fallout from this in the home setting, that these things are going to happen. So it's more of, it becomes less personal of this counselor feeling threatened. Now it's really focused on the system and just this reality of this strained relationship between the parent's child and this other student. So now you can look at those things kind of objectively, because the parent and the counselor are more removed and you're looking at systemic things. So there's a big difference here. First, this moves it from being something driven by the parent to something in the realm of a systemic problem. Okay. And that depersonalizes it. And that is a good position to put the counselor in and to help restore the counselor as far as not being specifically targeted in this conversation. This makes the call less personal. It begins to shift toward the system and working as this is a system issue that we will address. It's a positive step forward in the call.
So this is where I'm coming from. This is what I'm trying to.
I don't let it feel like she's backed into a corner.
But that's where she is right now, because she's already reached up to you and that point. Do you see that? I as a parent, I can't go in there.
I want to apologize for cutting you off earlier. Okay, it just got me worked up, and I apologize. Please excuse my behavior.
I understand. I know you're under a lot of pressure too. I know, and
I love these kids.
I know you do.
Kids, and I do anything for them.
The counselor apologizes for cutting off the parent earlier in the conversation, and the parent validates the counselor in the counselor's efforts to serve children. The remaining emotional air has now been released. The pressure's out of this conversation, and you can tell that the parent and the counselor are very much have put down the defensives and will have a positive discussion going forward.
But is it okay? What if I meet with Jen privately tomorrow? This other student doesn't need to know that we're meeting together because I don't want her to get suspicious of anything. But
Yes.
I can pull very inconspicuously, or where it's private, and let her just talk with me. Because the first time I met, it was just the two of us. So she expressed her concerns, and then the next day we involved the other student as well. And this next day, everything seemed fine. We're on the same page. Everyone understands. Okay, everything seems good. Okay, so and I tend to tell students, okay, from now on, everything that happened in the past is in the past. We're going to leave it there. We're going to go forward.
The counselor offers to meet with the child tomorrow for an additional discussion and says, I will do this discreetly to not make this other student aware of it. I am going to support this child with what is going on. So the counselor also states that when the counselor had met with the parent's child and this other child about some friction that they were having, that things seemed to resolve during that meeting. So that's actually a good thing. Let me tell you about it. It's called a restorative meeting, restorative practices. And it's a good step facilitated by a counselor, 17-year counselor, would be able to do this very well. But what appears to have happened, though, is that the other student was not genuine during this meeting. So just kind of went along with the meeting, said what that student anticipated the counselor wanted to hear, but then didn't change behavior. So unfortunately, the meeting didn't work. Gave the impression that it worked. In a lot of cases, it's a great step. It's a very successful step for a counselor to use. But again, the student was not being genuine, so left and continued to exhibit the same behaviors. Here, we are learning that the counselor has deployed solid counseling strategies. The credibility of the counselor is rising in this call.
So I'm going to consider this to be, because actually tomorrow is 1 week since I first met with her.
Okay.
So
So let's do this.
I do like to do a 1 week follow up.
Let's do this then. I
Okay.
like the one-on-one. I want her to meet with you because as a parent, I need an ally in the school, right? So we need to work together because you have her a big chunk of the day and then I've got her the rest of the time. And so I that's why I wanted to get the information, because I want to make sure that I can confirm what I've got before I start raising hell. I don't want to be that kind of parent that's going and disrupting all the things that you guys are doing, and it's something that's unfounded. And so that's what we were trying to do, is just trying to get some pieces of information, because it was clear to us from the way Dina was speaking about her conversations with you that she was uncomfortable, or she was in fear, or she felt like she was going to get in trouble. And so, and also what I don't want is I don't want any more counseling sessions with her and that person. And part of the reason for that is there's a power theme there. And that person, the bully, is so manipulative that they're going to say all the right things. But as soon as they go away, they start to socially isolate. They may not do anything directly to my daughter, but they will do things around her or friends and pull the friends away. And that has happened. Now, the other thing that concerns me for the past 3 years that she's been there, kinder, first, and second, has been a student. Her grades are slipping. And I don't understand why. So I'm concerned that this may have a direct impact to that.
The parent agrees that the counselor meeting with the parent's child is a good next step. The parent also validates that it is the parent and counselor working together in the best interest of the child, which is going to bring a resolution to this. What's missing here is the school's larger support network for such situations. No system should focus on one school person. This must be distributed. Other counselors, teachers, administrators. So who's involved? Because if it wasn't this parent's child, what if it is the child of parents that have been recently divorced, or a situation where a parent has suddenly passed away or something like that? There obviously is a core support team, and I think that needed to be talked about here. So let's talk about the team that's going to support this child and keep this child safe. And you want that too, because what if the counselor is out for a period of time, or sick for 3 days, goes to a conference or something like that? So you have people involved. Also, we seem at this point, 17 minutes, and we seem to have dodged this whole bullying investigation. So this seems to be going against policy. Bullying's been mentioned. It clearly has been insinuated. I think there's enough evidence there to go forward with a bullying investigation. So we're not there. We need a bullying investigation. We need the counselor to say, here's what our bullying investigation process is, and I'm going to meet with whoever it is that kicks that off and then move forward, because obviously there's been enough information that's come forward that there should be a bullying and harassment investigation going on. The parent confirms that he wanted to make sure that his information was aligned to the school's information, and it was. So this was a point the parent made earlier. Parent comes back to this. So it's important that the parent is saying, I'm seeing these things at home, I'm hearing these things at home, community, whatever. What you're saying is aligning to that. So this is validating. This is saying something's going on. This would be something I would have suggested that the parent send in a pre-phone call email, or state at the very start of the meeting. So saying, I have information, and I want to make sure that my information that impacts my daughter here at home and in the community is matching what is happening in school and the information that you have. And if not, why? And if so, how do we work together with a plan that has continuity across school and home settings? The parent shares additional concern that his child's grades are slipping, and that the child's decline in academic performance might be related to the unhealthy relationship with the other student. So that's new information. The parent tells the counselor that in the fall, he asked the child's classroom teacher about the policies for reporting bullying, or if his child had observed bullying of others, what his child should do. Should his child step up and protect the other child being bullied? What happens if his child becomes the target for retaliation? So that's mentioned, but the parent doesn't say what the classroom teacher told him. So that isn't brought out in the conversation, and the counselor doesn't ask about it, and it just kind of goes away. So again, we have bullying very prevalent through this, and there's really not much for follow-up on it. So that's a missed opportunity. And that's something the counselor should have picked up on in this call, and said, and asked, what did you have, where it's explicitly, here on our webpage for the school, or it's in the handbook, or I'm going to get this to you, and whatever. But it seemed like I'm assuming that whatever the classroom teacher told the parent was probably just more general. Again, we talk about, it seems like there's a feel of a lot of discretion, site-based management in this school. Not saying, if there is bullying, we have in our handbook a section specifically devoted to that, which includes how to report bullying, and also the response that you'll receive in the timeline for that response from the school. That would have been nice.
So this is I'm hyper vigilant about this, and I'm hyper aware of what's going on and the big problems that are happening in schools nowadays. And so it's important to me to collaborate with you. That's my whole goal. That's my intention. Okay. It's not to attack you or anything like that. And I apologize if I came off that way, but I needed to get you riled up to get you here to talk to me, and I apologize. It may not have been the right way to do it. And, this is the first time that she's my oldest daughter. And this is the first time I'm going through this. And so, I want to make sure that it's a collaborative effort with you.
The parent says to the counselor, "It is important for me to collaborate with you. This is the whole goal. That is my intention." That's very assuring. It's well received by the counselor. And at this point, we have a teaming of the parent and the counselor at 20 minutes in. The parent apologizes for presenting as attacking earlier in the conversation. I think that's a very good step for the parent to be honest about that, to reflect upon the conversation and say, it wasn't my intent to be attacking earlier in the conversation, but this is how you perceived it. And that's not how I want to be perceived. So, that's not the kind of conversation that I want to have with you. That's not going to be productive. The parent says, "This is my oldest child. This is my first time going through this." I love that honesty. And that's where the parent is reaching out to the counselor and saying, "Listen, I'm not exactly sure what to do with this. And you've been a counselor for 17 years. I need your help with this. You've seen similar, you've experienced similar, you've helped parents. Parents have come to you with similar concerns. I need you to help." So that really, again, is validating the counselor, and the parent is being real honest at this point of saying, "I haven't gone through this before. It's concerning to me. And I need to work with the school. I need to work with everybody who's working with my daughter, so we can address what's going on here."
So I would like it if you just check in with her every so often, but just one-on-ones. And like you said, don't make it obvious that you're talking to her so that other kids don't see. Just say, "Hey, what's going on? Has there been any updates?" Just, see what it is. And I would like it if you could report back to me what's happening. Now, we can make an agreement, you and I, that anything that is said between you and her, that will not be punished for it at all. I will not even mention it to her, that discussion, because it's more important to me that if she can't come to me, that she can go to another adult if she's telling you things that she's not telling us. But I would at least like to be aware so that hopefully I can contribute to creating an environment where she's exhibiting positive behaviors.
The parent offers to make an agreement with the counselor that anything the counselor discusses with him will not be shared with the child, and that the child will not encounter consequences for things shared by the counselor. I have mixed feelings about that. I appreciate that the parent is saying we can have communication, counselor, and I'm not going to take this back to my daughter and say, "I've been talking to your counselor and your counselor has told me that you said this." That kind of puts the counselor in an awkward position. And the counselor, there has to be some protocol in place, some standard protocol to follow at the school. And the counselor needs to make sure that the counselor is aligned and congruent to that protocol. So I think having conversations with the parent, that definitely is good. But the counselor needs to be very, I think, thoughtful that interacting with this parent is going to be congruent to how the counselor would be interacting with other parents. This is a very educated parent. This is a parent who has done his homework, has asked the right questions. So again, I think that probably the counselor, does have knows that the parent is very well educated to this, has integrity, has very strong vesting into this matter. But I would be kind of cautious on working out some of these deals on the parent side. I would more or less recommend the parent to say to the counselor, have you ever done this with parents? And it would be, that you've had periodic discussions with them and the parents and have not shared that information, with their child. And then is that something you would consider in this situation? And then you're putting it in control of the counselor. It still has a little bit of a coercion feel to it right here, that the counselor might be going along, with this, and maybe this isn't standard protocol. So I just think you want to be respectful of what the role of the counselor is, again, which the counselor didn't articulate at the start and had that opportunity to do that. But the counselor, did agree to this, and, a plan was worked out. So I have less issue, really, that the plan was worked out. It's just that there needs to be consistency, and I think in how this counselor functions within the school, what the counselor is doing needs to be consistent with generally how that counselor exercises counseling practices. The counselor is very open in stating that the child and the other student appear to want to be friends at times, which makes it seem like they're behaving more or less like typical peers. So getting that point across to the parent of saying, when I see these two, for the most part, they seem like they're getting along, or their appearance is a relationship of friends that's pretty similar to other kids. They squabble at times and at times they don't. So I'm not seeing the full depth of what we've talked about and what you've shared. I'm not seeing that, or I haven't seen that to this point. I'll look for it now. Like now I know what to look for. I think what's happening here at 23 minutes, the counselor is really saying, listen, I didn't talk with you because I believed that these were friends who were just going through a rough stretch. That's pretty normal for kids. And it wasn't worth contacting you as a parent. I met, with your child. We did a restorative meeting with the other person, and it seemed like things had resolved. So I think there's some very sound footing there for the counselor to come in at that point and to say, that those things have been done. And the appearance then, that the counselor had from these things and what was being observed was, things had, resolved. The counselor, in an upbeat tone, states that next year the parent's child can be placed in a different classroom other than the student. Okay, that's good. That's a good option, but it also projects this matter out too far. Okay, remember, we were about 15 minutes removed from some pretty rough back and forth discussion. So we don't need to be talking about what can happen next year. What needs to be talked about is what's going to happen next week. And so I think that's very important, is not to project this out too far. Look at what is right before, and this is where the counselor is doing a really nice job of wanting to get involved like right away, like that day or the next day, and observing the child in different settings and things like that. But to say things like, this is what we can do and stuff next year, like you'll get to that down the road, but you need to focus right now on what are we going to do like tomorrow, next week, and like the week after, and kind of go in like 2-week chunks to get through this. The parent begins using the word coaching when talking about how his spouse and he are talking with his child about the child's behaviors when the child is with the other student, saying, when you're with the other student, you're not always making good choices. And here's what those choices are that are not good. And we want you to be aware of those because we don't want you to be making those choices. And here's the impact they're going to have on other people and on you. And we want to bring awareness to that. So I like the word coaching, and it shows a massive progression in this conversation from the word escalation. So this, we can tell the vernacular really changes throughout this as the team begins to form between the school and the parent. The parent also talks more frequently about being a partner with the school in coaching his child on decision making. This is excellent. The counselor shares that she will observe the parent's child in a problematic setting today or tomorrow. This has brought the counselor very much to the forefront in this matter and demonstrates the counselor wanting to act on this issue in a very timely manner. So again, this is a veteran counselor, and what's shining through right now for this counselor is the competency of this counselor. 17 years, it wants to get on this right away, knows what to do. So initially, again, I think very unprepared for the call, which could have been external factors that had led to that, and the depth of questioning from a very prepared, educated parent. And then as the counselor was able to find footing throughout the phone call and work with the parent, things came to a much better outcome. The counselor speaks of the counselor's goal that the parent's child will feel empowered and sufficiently supported to come forward and stop engaging in negative behavior in order to preserve the friendship. The parent reveals that his child has demonstrated bullying behaviors with younger siblings, and that he is concerned that his child might exercise bullying behaviors toward others as his child spends more time with this friend at school. This friend at school who is the bully, is demonstrating this bullying behavior toward others. So the father is very concerned, if my child is spending time with the very proficient bully at school, is my child going to learn more of these bullying skills and manifest these in the school setting? Counselor said, I don't see this from your child at school. If anything, I see persuasion. I don't see bullying. But the father is saying, but persuasion can turn to coercion and can turn to bullying. And we've seen some of these things at home. So very concerned about this relationship between these two students. Very interesting twist later in this. So again, we have these defenses down, and now we have the dialogue of what the concerns are. So very, very much appreciate that both the parent and the counselor stuck with it through this call, because actually, I think they forged a strong relationship in this. And I think it showed on both sides that if they get to friction points, they know that they can work through those. But hopefully they wouldn't go through something like this again. This call, in most cases, I think because of the professionalism of the parent in education, and then the professionalism and experience of the counselor, this eventually found its way back on the rails. In most cases, I don't think calls like this would be productive, would need to be ended and then reconvened. The parent informs the counselor that his wife and he will take their child on periodic outings and try to foster open discussion. And they have a rule. When we go on outings, whatever you say, there are no repercussions, barring, of course, if they talk about that they've harmed somebody or stole something or something like that. But we can have open discussions. So, wow, what an excellent parenting tip right there. Making it typical for the child to talk with the parent is something to cultivate throughout youth, from little on. If you approach your child in their teens about something and you haven't previously had open talks with them, the child will sense that, hey, this is weird. And those conversations like that you suddenly want to have with me, mom or dad, I must be in trouble if I'm getting talked to now. So the parent has some excellent skills, and his wife in fostering this ongoing open communication with his child. Something I think that the counselor could have reinforced and built upon that. And I would say even share out with other parents and things like that. So, that's a great point. That's something I want to make sure that we talk about at parent conferences and stuff like that on, how to talk with your kids. Or we do have like a program on, how to talk with your kids. And it sounds like you're doing all of the things like that we teach in that or whatever. But so, there were some of those like missed opportunities like throughout this. From that point on, the call was very cordial and it wrapped up. The main points were revisited. A plan for communication was roughly gone over. Nothing was set in stone. Both the parent and the counselor validated each other in their efforts to work together to help the child.
The counselor did follow up with me by phone the next day, stating that everything was okay and that my daughter was doing good. She made no mention of looking into further situations of bullying. Well, approximately 2 weeks after my conversation with the counselor was no longer at the school. I received no communication from the new counselor for the remainder of the school year. Everything settled down and everything went back to normal. The grades started to improve and my daughter didn't report any more issues. However, 3 weeks after that conversation with the counselor, my daughter came to me and told me that a friend of hers had mentioned that she wanted to kill herself. She was a third grader. I asked my daughter if she had asked her why, and my daughter told me that the girl said because nobody liked her. She mentioned that the girl that my daughter had reported, she would pick on her and call her names. My daughter seemed genuinely concerned, so I asked her what she wanted to do about it. My daughter suggested that she should go to the vice principal and notify him of the situation. I followed up by asking her if she wanted me to join her. She promptly said no. I asked her if she wanted me to email the vice principal. She said no again. I asked her if she wanted me to call the vice principal. Same answer. No. She wanted to do this on her own and stated that if she needed my help, she would ask. So I allowed her to do that. The next day, she went and notified the vice principal of the situation, and then told her friend that she was trying to help her and that the vice principal would be contacting her and that not to worry that she wasn't in any trouble. I do know that the meeting did happen, but I heard no further on the situation. To my knowledge, there were no follow-ups to my report of potential bullying. I nor my daughter were asked any questions pertaining to the girl in question. To my knowledge, there were no more follow-ups to my report of potential bullying.
In summary, I have some suggestions. One is, after this phone call, I would set up a communication schedule. So are we going to communicate once a week, and is it going to be on Thursdays, or when will it be? So you actually have that down. And it can be through an email. The counselor indicated that the counselor likes to use a phone call. So, hey, you can use a phone call. That's fine. Phone calls are good because you can ask clarifying questions, but it also makes it harder to document. So you want to inject periodic email summaries if you're the parent saying, we talked the last, couple times on this date and this date, and here's what we had talked about, and here's the next steps that we're going to do and whatever. So you do have those records of what you talked about, because otherwise, again, it gets really hard to say, well, we talked about this when, we had our phone call last month, and it'd be like, well, I'm not sure that we talked about this in that phone call. So again, phone calls are good. It's just you want to make sure that you have that documentation process. Even if it's a record that you're keeping in your own, as a parent, in your own Google Docs, where you're putting down a few points that you've talked about after that call. We talked on this date, and And here were some of the points that we talked about. For the parent, hey, become familiar with the bullying reporting and investigating process in the school. That's something that this parent could have mentioned, of saying, you know what, I have the handbook, and the handbook indicates this for bullying and harassment. Usually is always in the school handbook, or else it's in school policy, but it's there, it's somewhere. So be prepared with that. And I think definitely with this, could have gone a little bit further in asking, what's the bullying and reporting process, and what does the investigation look like? What do I get? And if the counselor is not able to answer that, and maybe the counselor isn't the investigator on these things, maybe they keep the counselor neutral and it's an administrator investigating, then it really becomes the counselor saying, I will talk to the administrator and have the administrator contact you. And then you and the administrator can talk through that, because typically, like, that's not my role of doing the investigation. But I think that was something that was left out there, and nothing is going to happen with that, and something needed to happen with that. And finally, systemic documentation is so important in schools, okay? And the parent indicated that the parent had the emails and documentation, which is great. And then on the school side, the counselor, it seemed, kind of found documentation, or maybe notes the counselor had taken from this discussion with the parent's child. But really, we lack this system of documentation and record keeping, because the counselor was unaware of some discussions that had happened with other teachers. There didn't seem to be this longitudinal way to track things. So I think that needs to definitely, in this case, be present. And, you know, that all links back to site-based management and this whole thing of discretion. And I've seen it where there can be a lot of discretion afforded. And what happens then is people do address things, they get involved. You know, this counselor met with the student and the other student to do a restorative meeting. But, you know, were those things documented, or were they just in the memory of the counselor? So that becomes important if something, you know, happens next year and there isn't anything saying, hey, well, there was something in the previous year that happened with these students. So maybe we do have a pattern here, and now we're going to look at things as a pattern versus isolated events. So I hope that my listening and analysis of this phone call has been helpful for you. I commend the parent for recording this phone call, and I think it's a wonderful tool to make sure that you can be engaged in a conversation and then have a document of what was discussed. And again, I encourage people to be very upfront with this and say, I'm recording this, or I'm going to record this, and the reason is because I want to be engaged in this conversation. Now, do you need to do that all the time? Absolutely not. And because normally, you know, we wouldn't do that. But if we have things that are very intense, jargon, procedure, things like that, I don't think there's anything wrong at all with using a recording. Make sure that you know your state laws and things like that, so you're not doing a one-sided recording without the other person knowing if that's not permitted in your state. But I mean, I would just say be upfront of, hey, I want to record this, or I am going to record this, and let the person know ahead of time so they can record it on their end if you want. And I think too, there can be a lot of goodwill saying, I'm going to record it, and like I'll make the recording available to you too. Like I can send you a copy. Just like when I talked about meetings that be face to face and things on a whiteboard, and you take a picture with your camera and immediately send it, get everybody's email address who's around that table, and in one click, everybody has exactly, you know, that document of that live document, what was written up on the whiteboard of here's the concerns, here's the actions, next steps, timelines, things like that. So very much appreciate it. Thank you so much for Hector Solis for sharing this. and using this as an educational tool for parents wanting to have effective communications with their schools.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. And just a quick note, I will be taking the next 3 weeks off as I prepare to move into and set up my new studio. Finally, it's here. So, we will pick up the bullying series then. You know, after a year of researching, looking for answers into why we are having such a hard time dealing with bullying, so much so that our kids, the schools, and parents are fatigued by the very mention of it. I was referred to Nancy Willard by Dr. Samir Hinduja, a co-director of the Cyberbullying Research Center, and this changed the way I look at bullying. So in 3 weeks, you will hear the discussion that reframed my view on bullying. We have long heard the stories of the weak and quiet kids being targeted, but this is not always the case. My daughter, as you heard, would not fall into the category of being considered weak, yet she was in the crosshairs of a bully. This will all make sense to you, as it did for me. So stay tuned as we march towards the final 2 episodes of the bullying series. You know, up until this point, you have heard about the effects of bullying through Mallory's story and the devastating effects it can have on our young ones. You have heard my personal story about how schools may not be as prepared and how it's important now that we make sure that our kids' mental and emotional well-being are attended to. As we go down the stretch of this series, I will present solutions that will help you understand what is happening and how to empower our kids to resilience. Thanks to Dr. David Perrodin for lending his expertise yet again. And if you want to hear more of the Safety Doc, check out his podcast on all the major podcast players. Just search the keyword Safety Doc Podcast. Shane Yoder and his team at puttheminasong.com provided the theme music. And I would be remiss if I do not thank my family for allowing me to share these stories with you. Without them, this would not be possible. So until next time, stay aware, be aware, and I'll talk to you soon.